Hello. Today we're going to be taking a very brief look at the new foliage features which were added in 3.17.11. To start up, we're just going to load dev test 4 in the dev kit. I'm not going to cover any of the basics of the dev kit because we did that in the last video. But once you're inside, there's this new window which you can open from the window list called the Foliage tool. And what you can do from here is basically equivalent to the old editor's grass or detail menu, which had a baking button there, as well as the resources menu, which had a baking button in there as well. But now they're all grouped together, and in the future I want to merge the resources and object systems, so that way you can bake things like boulders onto your cliff sides, or small little details maybe like frying pans on ovens, stuff like that. Once we've got that tool open, we can give it a quick try by turning on instance meshes, which are all the little grass objects and pebbles on the ground, and then clicking Bake Foliage Local. I'll just show a little bit of progress about how far it is, and you'll notice that the grass has updated. The local area updates just the area that you can see, although that's not affected by your foliage quality draw distance setting, whereas Bake Foliage Global will do the entire map, and usually that takes a lot longer. Now you might notice that all these objects that previously had no grass on them whatsoever have now got all these nice details on them, as well as, of course, the terrain, which used to. So the way that you hook these up is if you go into the asset browser, you can find a terrain material, like in all my official ones are in Core Assets Landscapes Materials. I've put them into different map folders. And then from here, when you select one, you can see that each has a foliage asset linked. So in this case, the dirt is linked up with the gravel collection, whereas something like the normal grass is hooked up to the grass collection, and sand is hooked up to the gravel sand collection. Now, these probably should be renamed, and I will do this at some point, a little bit more specific to which map they're from, because when you have a whole bunch of them, it can get a little bit confusing. But for the meantime, they're all in the same folder as the map name. So for example, if we go into the PEI grass folder, we can find PEI's grass collection. Some other maps, like for example Washington, we go into the Washington folder, they have multiple grass collections, and so in this case, grass 1 is the golf course grass, whereas grass 0 is the normal all over the map grass. Anyway, once you have a grass collection, which you can also create by right-clicking on a folder, and creating a foliage info collection, you can see that we have a list of different foliage types, and these can be added to with the little plus button, or removed with the minus. This will also be improved in the future, like I want to make it so that you can drag and drop them, as well as being able to, or that is, drag and drop them to reorder them, as well as drag and drop onto the plus button to add a new one, as well as a few other minor adjustments, like right now, undoing doesn't work properly with it. Anyway, each of these is a different foliage info asset, which is a base class that contains a little bit of information that I think is pretty general for different types of detailing that you would want on the ground. In the future, it would probably make more sense to rename it to detailing rather than foliage. We can select one of these, like we have the grass 0 foliage, and in here we can see all the different options. This is an example of a instance mesh foliage asset. There's a few different types of these, the other one right now being the resource ones, which are the trees. And so the instance mesh has the most options for right now. It has a mesh, which it's probably okay if you're doing some grass to use my default grass mesh as just a simple 6 triangle little detail, which is one of the nice things about this over the old grass system, is that you'll notice that each instance of the grass has a little bit more volume to it, as opposed to the simple planes in the Unity version, as well as the flowers are this, I guess 12 triangle, or no wait, they have a little bit of extra detail at the top, so I think it's more like 18. But yeah, the flowers are a little bit more detailed. So you can set that up, and then the material has to be a Unity shader that has instanced, it's like multi-compile instancing, something like that. Although one downside is that if you try and use a speed tree shader with instancing, it won't work properly unless you're using a normal mesh renderer. You can't use the speed tree stuff with this sort of instancing. From there, there's a whole bunch of other options. We'll just go over them quickly. Cast shadows will make it so that your object will cast shadows. I think because a lot of these smaller objects, the distance between the shadow and the object itself, because that's a little bit bigger, it doesn't look very good. Whereas if you had some sort of bush that didn't have collision, which I will probably convert mine to use this, the bushes, you might want to turn on shadows for that. Tile dithering is hopefully not too noticeable. When you get closer to a tile, it will start to dither out the instances, which works really well for something that you won't notice as much, like grass. But because the flowers have so much more color and contrast to them, if we select one of those, you can see that the dithering is turned off. I would show you an example right now, but because of the way the instancing works, we can't change that option without rebaking it. From there, there's density. Density is the square area and how many instances per that. Wait, that's a weird way of explaining it. So for example, if you had density set to 4, then that would mean that for every 4 square meters, there would be 1 instance of this foliage. So the grass has a very low density, so for every 2 square meters, there's 1 grass, whereas flowers has a much higher value, so that way you get a lot more spacing between the grass. Normal position offset is the distance from the surface that it was added to. So you might have some sort of object that it makes a lot more sense to move off the ground, or maybe like a tree you want to merge into the ground a little bit. Rotation offset is a modifier applied right after the normal alignment. And so then if your object is imported for Blender, for example, you might have to rotate it by -90 degrees on the x-axis. Normal rotation alignment is how much the instance will try to stick to the angle of the surface. So if it was 0, it would just be facing straight up. If it was 1, it would be completely aligned to the surface. A value in between will blend between them. Min weight and max weight are the minimum and maximum weight of the surface that it's attached to. So for example, on terrain, because it's a splat map, each pixel of the terrain, not the visual pixel, but the texture that represents the different textures on the terrain, each of those has a different weight. And so then this lets you set up so that even if you have like 1% opacity, maybe you don't want some pebbles there. Min angle and max angle are the minimum and maximum angle that it'll spawn on a hill. So the grass has a maximum angle of 60 so that you don't get it on some of these really steep slopes. Minimum rotation and maximum rotation let you specify a random rotation on an axis, or all 3 axes if you want, axes, as well as same sort of thing with min and max scale, where you can have a little bit of variety in the scaling of your instance. I think that covers everything about these instance meshes. They should be very versatile, and there probably will be a few more options in the future. For example, I'm probably going to have an option so that they can't disable a specific foliage type. So in the case of bushes, you can still use them as cover while still getting the performance benefit of them being these instant meshes. The other type, which isn't really set up officially yet, is the test resources. And so this is where you can set it up so that the trees will spawn in the new terrain. The reason I did this is so that if you do decide to convert your map now, you can still use the old trees on the new terrain while I work on cleaning everything up. Because in the future, the trees are just going to be converted to normal objects now that you can like destroy things, like you shoot a grenade at the fence, it explodes and all that. But for the meantime, this is kind of the temporary fix. And so it has essentially the same options, although right now most of these don't do anything because it is still using the old tree system, which doesn't have much control. But when they're converted to objects, you'll be able to like even grab them with the selection tool and move them around. Obstruction radius is how far it will check to make sure there's nothing nearby. So that way you don't end up with trees inside a building, for example. And then the resource. This isn't easily set up right now because the trees don't actually use the new asset system. So this is also a good example to show you how much nicer the new files are. If we open up bundles, resources, and then one of these trees, maybe we'll just grab birch 0 because that's first. You can see the GUID at the top. This is a unique ID. No other asset made by anyone else will ever have this ID. Whereas, of course, someone could easily pick a number like 20,000 or 30,000 with the old system. We can copy this to the clipboard. And then if we go to bundles, assets, landscapes, foliage, test, this is where my test resource was. You can see that the new files have a lot more structure. And then down here under resource, we can see that it is linked to a GUID. And so if we wanted to use the birch tree instead, we could just paste that in and save it. Now if we were to reload this in game, it would say birch 0 instead of ornament 0. That should cover everything with the foliage system. Again, a lot of this will be changing. One other thing that could be useful, although right now it's mostly taken care of automatically, are these nice, let's see if we can bring it up, type browser, core. There are foliage volumes now. And if you select this, it's the first object in the world which uses the inspector. This is kind of the direction I want to go with all the nodes. For example, I know a lot of people are posting on the subreddit or sending me emails or Steam forums, everywhere, talking about different node ideas, but the goal is that there will be first there'll be a abstraction layer for all the different volumes. So there'll be like capsule volumes, sphere volumes, box volumes, and they'll all have some interfaces for checking whether points inside, how far away it is, as well as different systems for storing them and efficiently checking whether something's inside a volume. So for example, like water volumes, you check whether the player's in the volume. But when you select them, that's where all those new options will be, rather than using the old like effect node type thing. Anyway, when we have this, in fact we have one already in the level over here, you can see that when it's set to subtractive mode, it will prevent any foliage from spawning inside. So this is a very precise way to remove foliage. You can see that the edge is very crisp, and if we were to rotate this or scale it, it would continue to have very precise edges with the foliage. The other mode that this site can have is additive, which basically says if you have any additive volumes in your level, it will only generate foliage tiles inside of these volumes. And so that means that they're not quite as precise because the foliage tiles are bigger than these individual little meshes. So you'll have kind of a coarse edge along the side of these additive volumes. But then within them, if you need to be precise, you can use some subtractive volumes. The reason you'd want to use these is if you have a very small level or a very linear level, you might only want foliage in that small area, which would also make it faster to bake. And so then, for example, on Russia, the first time I baked the foliage on Russia, it took about an hour. But by adding this additive volumes feature, it covers just the main level area, which is, like for example, if we made it something like this. This way it's only baking foliage inside the main map area. And so then that cut down the time to about 15 minutes. Then within the level, you might use these subtractive volumes if you have some sort of maybe interior farm, or maybe you're just ending up with some foliage somewhere you don't want, or inside an object because you have a big grass plain and you can't resize it for some reason. But there's no immediate plan for what these could be used for, but I'm hopeful that they'll prove useful. The other new tool that I think you'll find very useful is the ground upgrade wizard, although the name gets cut off. But anyway, what this does is this can be used to very quickly update all the terrain in your map to the new landscape tiles, rather than doing them one by one. And so this is what I use to convert all the official maps, is you go and find a material, and then you just drag and drop these materials into these different slots. And the dragging and dropping is a little bit wonky right now. It's just because I didn't have that much time, very busy this week. But in the future, there'll be like a lot more options for these different assets, like go view this asset in the asset browser, or clear this reference, or search with like a little text box to type in some text. As well as like drag it and you see a little yellow box around it where you can drop it. But anyway, you hook all these up, and then you click upgrade, and it'll create all the tiles for your map. Because I already converted all the official maps, I don't really have a good example for this, but it should just work. The one thing is if you don't already have a foliage system or a landscape in your level, it won't create that for you. It will create the foliage volume, but it won't create those. So you want to add those first. But yeah, hopefully this is useful. Let me know if you run into any problems with this. It should work though. I tested on so many maps. It should work. What was the last thing? Right, I forgot to mention that if you go to a foliage material, landscapes materials, this is where you hook up. Maybe I already did, I'll cover that. This is why I need to have some sort of script for what we're going to talk about. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope this helped explain the foliage system, so that way you can convert your maps. Although I would really be hesitant if you're working on your map regularly, like this isn't a mostly finished map, because it is really a hassle to go back and forth between the editors now, since you can't move objects yet with the new editor. That is on my to-do list though, of course. It will be soon, sometime. Anyway, thanks for watching. Send me an email, nelson@smartjustgames.com, if you have any questions or the comments, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.